When you have that kind of epiphany, how can you not name that author as one of your favorites? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Just Another Struggling Writer, the beleaguered author's one-stop shop for commiseration and hopefully inspiration. My name is Carrie Scher, and I am just another struggling writer. Well, today I am introducing a new kind of video, which I am titling 3 by 3 by 3, wherein I have 3 categories with 3 different answers. And the topic for today's video is authors. So the first category is 3 authors I will read literally anything they put out. And first up in this category for me is Mark Lawrence. It only took one book by Mark Lawrence to instantly rocket him to the top of my new favorite authors back in 2018 or 19 when I read Red Sister. Red Sister was immediately one of my most favorite books, definitely recently, but pretty up there all time as well. And what I love especially was Mark Lawrence's writing. So even though I had only read the one book, I felt pretty confident that I would like anything that he put out. I've since read 2 more books, a continuation of the same series, the Book of the Ancestor, and then the beginning of a new series set in the same world. And I enjoyed both. The second series is YA, so that's a little bit tougher pill for me to swallow, but I still gave it 3.5. And that poignant writing quality remained throughout, which bolsters my opinion that his writing style is just one that simply appeals to me, that it's going to speak to me no matter what the story itself is about. I have a couple of his other books waiting in the wings. The Prince of Thorns series, I don't know what the actual series is called, but I'm pretty sure the first one is called Prince of Thorns, and then The Book That Wouldn't Burn, which is the first book in his most recent series. And to be honest with you, with The Book That Wouldn't Burn, it has been one of those situations where I'm afraid of how much I'm going to love it, and so I haven't picked it up yet, but I'm hoping that one of these TBR draws eventually is going to be that one, so I'll have an excuse to stop avoiding it. Next up in this category is, it shouldn't be any surprise if you follow my channel at all, and that is T. Kingfisher. Reading T. Kingfisher just makes me feel good. I don't care what I'm reading, whether it is horror or cozy fantasy or dark fairy tale retelling or fantasy romance. I have never rated anything that she's written below a 3, and those 3s were more just because the genre wasn't to my taste. That's mostly for her horror books. I have discovered this year that I am not really a fan of horror. Nothing against the genre. It's just I don't get titillated by it. But that being said, just the way that she writes, especially her female protagonists, I just adore them. And she has such a way of writing dark fairy tale vibes and marrying that to cozy fantasy. It's just so interesting the way that she can do that and make it feel natural. It doesn't feel affected at all. It's just such a nice time to be reading any of her books. And I have been slowly working my way through her catalog this year. I've still got the Clockwork Boy series, the rest of the Paladin series, Nettle and Bone, and I think the new one, I am on the hold list for her new one that just came out. But I am determined. I'm going to get all these books read and absolutely will read anything she puts out. And the third in this category is a very recent addition, and that is Robert Jackson Bennett. I read Foundry Side in June and I loved it so much. I gave it 5 stars. And then I recently just finished The Tainted Cup, which is the first entry in his new series, and I gave that 4.5 stars. And similar to Mark Lawrence, there's just something about the way that he tells his stories and the way that he shapes his protagonists that just speaks to me. It just evokes something in me. I just simply enjoy his books. And yes, my sample size is small, but I think that just goes to show you how strong a reaction I have had to both books that I have read. In my last reading vlog, I talked a little bit about how reading The Tainted Cup made me realize that I had reclaimed reading as a hobby for the first time in a long, long time. And when you have that kind of epiphany, how can you not name that author as one of your favorites? While he's new to me, only in the last couple of months, and my sample size is small, I'm pretty confident that I can say that I will read anything he puts out. For the second category in this 3 by 3 by 3 is 3 authors I didn't like the first time, but I'm willing to try again. The first one I have to say is Fonda Lee. I tried Jade City and I just couldn't do it. And it has nothing to do with the writing, nothing to do with the quality. It has everything to do with the fact that crime boss mafia stories are just not for me. I just can't. I tried so many times to read that book and the furthest I made it was at 50%. And if you know what happens at 50% of that book, I could not proceed after that. I just couldn't deal with it. That's not the kind of story I want to read. And so while I really enjoyed her writing and I really enjoyed the world and even elements of the story, just the framework, the central conceit of the crime families fighting each other and whatnot. I'm sorry. I wasn't a big fan of Breaking Bad either. I'm not really just a big fan of those kinds of stories. I'm so sorry. So I would love to read something else by Fonda Lee. I think she has a novella out there somewhere, Untethered Sky, which is like a sci-fi, I believe, something to do with griffins or something. I've seen it out there a couple of times. Definitely willing to try that. Again, I liked her writing. It was just that particular story. I couldn't bring myself to get through it, even though the writing was so good. I tried Fonda. I tried so hard. I tried 3 times to read that book. The next on this list is V.E. Schwab. I read A Darker Shade of Magic, and I was a little bit disappointed. I thought the pacing was wrong. It was just so fast. So fast. I really didn't enjoy the kind of breakneck speed. And I also, while I liked Kel and I liked Lila separately, like the beginning parts of the story where they're apart, as soon as they came together, I didn't like them together. I didn't like the way they meshed. I didn't think they blended at all. And then again, you add that to the like sort of just absolute like freight train speed of the plot, and I just felt completely like startled by it and kind of dizzy. And I didn't really end up liking it as much. I know she has a couple more series out there and a standalone, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, which has kind of a mixed reception. But again, I don't know that it was her writing that threw me off. I think it was just this particular plot and the way that she paced it. I would definitely try another one of her books to see if it was just a one book thing or a one plot thing, or if she's just not for me after all, but definitely willing to try again. And then the third author in this category is Roshani Chokshi, who wrote The Last Tale of the Flower Bride. And my beef with that book is that it was marketed as a fantasy, and I don't care what anyone tells you, it is in no way a fantasy. I felt bamboozled. I felt taken in. I felt betrayed when I got closed the end cover of that book and was like, there was nothing fucking fantasy about this book. Now, I don't know if that's like the fault of the publisher or the marketer or whoever. Probably not her fault. But if anyone tries to tell you that that book is fantasy, they're fucking lying to you. And as someone who likes fantasy, enjoys fantasy, pursues fantasy, and as someone who is not that interested in contemporary, which is what this ultimately was, I was just like, ugh. It just felt like a waste of my time. And again, a betrayal to call it a fantasy when there was nothing in it. And I felt like the worst part was, as I kept reading, I was like, they called this a fantasy. There has to be magic or fairies or a ghost or something in it. That being said, the writing was great. Very lyrical, very, very dark and beautiful, very atmospheric. If there was just like some magic in that story, even just a little bit, even just magical realism, I think I would have really liked that book. But it was a complete lie to call it a fantasy. And I could not divorce that fact from my enjoyment of it. Again, I don't know if that's her fault necessarily, or if that was just a decision that the marketing team or the publisher made to make the book appeal to a certain group of fans. It got me. Unfortunately, it backfired with me, and it made me like dislike it, even though there was nothing wrong with the book itself. It's just that my expectations going in, as it was tagged as a fantasy, were completely betrayed. So definitely, unfortunately, I think the only other books that she has out is a YA fantasy series. So that would not be the first thing I reach for to convince me to continue reading her. So maybe if she comes out with something else that's adult that is actually a fantasy, I will read it. And then last category, 3 authors I will never read. And buckle in for maybe some unpopular opinions, because the first one is Cassandra Clare. Now, I am the ripe age of 36, and I was a teenager, younger teenager, at the height of the Boy Wizard series Who Shall Not Be Named fandom's kerfuffle with Cassandra Clare. In fact, I had one of my best friend at the time was in the Yahoo group at the center of the kerfuffle. And unfortunately, I've just never been able to wash the bad taste of plagiarism allegations and incessant bullying, which I witnessed. I was there. Don't cite the old magic to me, witch. I was there when it was written. And you cannot convince me to pick up a Cassandra Clare book. Now, it helps that she has almost exclusively written YA, and all of the weird incesty stuff in it is already a turnoff, but I just can't do it. I'm not interested in anything that she has to write, and I'm definitely not interested in giving her money. The second author in this category is also a fairly new addition to this, and that is Sebastian de Castell. I tried one of his books earlier this month, and I thought it was very generic white male fantasy, and I ultimately had to DNF it for my own mental health after a sexual assault scene was basically just shrugged off because the victim was a man. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Absolute no from me from here on out. Nothing. No matter what you say or whatever occurs in the other books, you will not convince me to pick them up. And that, again, is just for my own mental health. That might not be triggering for you guys. Absolutely not for me. I didn't put her on this list, but for a similar reason, I don't think I'll ever be reading Chloe Gong again either because of what she did in Immortal Longings. Consent is not to be fucked with, in my opinion. And then I struggled to come up with a third one for this because I am still learning which authors I like, which I don't. And I haven't come across too many that I will just avoid wholesale. But after I thought about it, I realized that the third must be Jay Kristoff. For a lot of the same reasons, generic white male fantasy, cultural appropriation, YA, just some icky online behavior. I don't know that I would like any of his books anyway, and I think it's just the principle of the thing at this point. No matter how many times I see Nevernight on the shelf at the library or at Half Price Books, I'm just, no thank you. And that is it. I hope you enjoyed this fun little experimental format. I plan on doing a couple of others, maybe one for specific books or tropes that I like to see in books, or maybe tropes that I like to use in my own writing. If any of those ideas appeal to you, just let me know in the comments and I would be happy to make more videos like this. In my next video, I will have my weekly writing vlog for you, and it has been a week of revelation, so I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.